Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 1979. No, it's not 1979. It's 79. And again, I make the the very clear delineation between what the hell happened when the numbers are insignificant, when they break through the century mark. And so 79, I don't have much for that. The great, there's that Smashing Pumpkins song we could go with, right? I think the name of that song is 1979. And we have, anytime you're closing in on a decimal, a 10, and rounding out, that's a pretty cool one. And the turn of the decade and all that stuff. And I guess, in a way to frame things in my life as fortunate rather than put upon, which is a practice I've had to pick up on just for my own benefit and hopefully, for that sort of cosmic, karmic and, universal kind of idea of laws of attraction. There has often been a lament, people of my generation, that, the idea of straddling these eras, that things aren't native to you in the realm of technologies and things like that. But, just imagine being born before rock and roll, before concept albums, when you're, Porgy and Bess is the album you're spinning. And no knock on, like there's Paul Anka's out there, but like in late great Neil Sedaka passed away. But if that was the music of your day, you probably weren't, it was novel and it was well done, but it wasn't like the incredible sort of golden era of LP rock, long form LPs, that when FM radio, kind of the format, the rock journalism, all that stuff, and then that was for boomers. But if you straddled that and then moved into MTV and, and again, I speak mostly about culture and self-obsession. That's what I talk about. But, some of the things that are irksome are also advantageous. You have a foot in the analog world and now you live in the digital world. And maybe one of the sort of laments is that you can mourn the death of the way it was. And I think that's for every generation goes through that. But certainly Gen X and maybe millennials understand that, what a damn shame, And I noticed this as a young buck in New York, always hanging out with older people. That's sort of always been my my blueprint. Surrounded by older people, more comfortable around older people, verbally precocious, things like that made me just gravitate toward older people. And it, when I was in New York, the older cats, so if I'm in my 20s and they're in their 30s, 40s, the older cats had grown up in the 60s and they were wilder than us because, that they, a lot of it's because they had no brakes, you know what I mean? And maybe it was a lot different because they were, a lot of them were white fellas, so that could be baked into the cake. But all that stuff aside, they were wilder, things were less expensive, and they partied in a different kind of crazy way. And I guess no one wants to talk about this because it really wasn't a cultural shift, but sort of a medical shift. There's HIV and AIDS. There's like pre-Magic Johnson and post-Magic Johnson. So that put a spook in a lot of hedonism, which is maybe for the better, I would suppose. But the hedonism up until then for the heterosexual male, I suppose, who thought he had game or who worked in New York City or had, worked in the nightclub scenes, like that must have been pretty wild and pretty, unfettered to some degree. And I'm not saying I was chaste, but I'm saying I always had this governor, this puritanical, probably from having a generation kind of gap in my own family, and just brought up sheltered and things like that. But that was an example of where you could start to see the previous generations weren't cornier than us. They were wilder than us. And now it's full circle. And again, last week I spoke about how things take 30 years. It's full circle where the current 20-somethings aren't drinking as much, aren't even having sex as much, and aren't, gallivanting, and they're worried more than they're excited, and that's a bummer. And so you should feel bad about that and wonder how to turn that tide. But I guess I'm saying that the Rolling Stone was gathering moss back in my 20s, and now it's fully blown to it's a big pile of grass, and the rock is in the center like that. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And so all you can do is be grateful for where you were born, and be grateful you got a chance, right? And, God forbid you were a World War II. For some reason, maybe it has to do with current hostilities in the world, but I started rewatching Band of Brothers, and that is not my war. Not my uncles. A couple of my uncles were in that, not in those particular battles, but one of my uncles was in the Battle of the Bulge, and my dad served after World War II. But they used the GI Bill, and that's what they credit for the building of the middle class, right? And maybe also the building of the notion of higher education being a gateway, et cetera, et cetera. And now that's being refuted and or dismantled, or what have you. And I think it's rich for a person from my generation to gloat about, if you watch a lot of YouTube and you're into music and you follow bands and you watch reaction videos, it shouldn't be, I don't want to say shouldn't, that's a tough one, but it's not cool for, this shows you where things have gone kind of off track. If a young person today says, boy, you had it good back then, that's like nostalgia foisted on the current generation. And you're hoping that 30 years from now, people in the 2020s will get their sort of retro will be in. But what would it be celebrating? And that's a bummer if we can't sort of quote unquote hold on to some of those humanistic things, in my opinion. So the nostalgia that is, if you're young today and you have nostalgia for the 90s, that's really an ache. It's an ache. It's a feeling of mourning. It's a feeling of loss. It's something we didn't have. My generation, 70s, 80s, I guess maybe flower power. I didn't really envy hippies, and I didn't envy, I didn't like Happy Days, I guess. The 50s nostalgia in my youth, that was fun, but I don't know that I envied it. And you'll hear the sort of extreme podcaster Tim Dillon. He had a rant that went viral. And he's younger than me, but he was basically saying that, we're the last of the humans, basically, in a sense that we had to call a girl's house. I mean, he wasn't using these examples, but you had to call a girl's when you got a girl's phone number in high school or junior high. When you got a girl's number, most of the time, except for the really spoiled ones, like you were calling the house, and that's. I mean, just think of the compound stressors there. You're calling the house, so you're going to have to talk to a mother or a father, or God forbid, like one of her siblings who are either going to fuck with you, hang up on your face, call you a fucking jerk off. The father's going to be like, what the fuck are you doing? The mom's going to be maybe making a cute thing about it. And then they're going to ask you who you are. And then if they know it was all of that. And then you had to like have something to say to the girl on the other end. Or the guy, I guess. But you know what I'm saying. And so it's productivity and it's selling products, but taking phones off the wall and putting them in your pocket. Now, yeah, that's a computer and that's cool, and it's got GPS and music and all that stuff is cool. But the phone part is the least used part. They've done studies, right, where when you look at the actual time people are on their phone when they do the weekly report, it's the phone app itself. The calling itself is one of the least used apps you're using, meaning you're not talking to people. You're texting and you're surfing the net and you're doing other apps, but you're not using the phone. So it's not that they're taking it off the wall, putting it in your pocket. That made you an individual user, right? That took away the communal aspect of sharing a phone. And maybe it's better for the adult, of course, to not have to share a phone with a sibling. My mother still, God bless her, my mother still gets a busy. You still get people make these memes about things from the 80s and things like, I know what a rotary phone is. I know what a touch tone phone is. I know what a landline is. But call waiting, my mother still doesn't have it. So think about being a kid trying to have a social life, having no cell phone, not having your own phone, and the thing gets busy signals. You know what I'm saying? So again, these are all middle class American problems. But what it takes away is getting back to that phone call. And I talk about it in my show and what kids are not doing, right? And it's not to gloat. It's done by us, that we took away courtship and replaced it with basically curating an avatar on social media and gloating and showing and stunting and flex. Everything's a flex. Everything's a stunting, what we used to call stunting or showing out, And I don't know how they're doing it today. And maybe they've also absorbed our anxieties over the years that heartbreak is a fucking bummer, right? And we're not living with and I think it's part of being post-literate also. Quotes, reading quotes, having an English teacher tell you what quote out of this line means something to you, right? It's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all, right? A lot of people don't believe that. A lot of people aren't living as if that were true. It's hard. It's hard. That's probably why I don't have a dog. I want a dog so bad. I love a dog. But I'm living in the future of 10, 12 years down the line having to part with that lovely creature. And I don't know if I could handle it, right? But that would be how I clung to every relationship, And loss is agony. A lot of the things that these technologies do is they mitigate our feelings of inadequacy and they mitigate our feelings of risk, and they eliminate our feelings of a need to confront the idea that we talk about this fucking notion of closure, and yet the cell phone and the text culture and the email culture, we're able to ghost people. And I guess you could have always done that. That's what, and that was the additional human. I don't want to say how many times, but do you know how many times I've had to call, like I called in the 90s when people in New York lived with roommates and they'd share a phone on their wall, right? But certainly with an answering machine and call waiting, right? You'd have to call and then leave a message, and then the roommate would have to write it down or not, or you'd have to leave a message on the answering machine. But there was this sort of agony of having to face the ghost. Do you know what I'm saying? And then it never got so bad as a roommate saying, bro, hang it up, give it up. She ain't calling you back, It never got that bad, but that's what I'm talking about. All those micro pains and all those micro heartbreaks are taken out because you can avoid. You can, the idea that I don't have many followers. I'm working on that or whatever, but it goes up and down by a few every couple of days. And who the fuck's Xing people out? I'm a little more select about who I follow because I don't know why. I'm just not that into it. And I'm not playing the game of follow 1,000 people to get 40% of them to follow you, so your number goes up. I don't know. But the idea that you would unfollow somebody means you're actively aware of this nonsense, and that means you have to go into your feed and say, did they, and there's a way to block some, like these cowardly devices, these cowardly toggle switches. Do you want to mute somebody, which is like, you won't see they're annoying, but you don't have the balls to say, I'm not into this shit. And then engagement, the thing that drives it so rapidly is like getting into it with people, And so I guess on Twitter X, I don't engage. I'm losing followers just like as a declining stock because I don't post and I don't interact, but they call me a lurker, and maybe that's true too. But I think I have to. How do I put it? I've been having some issues and some challenges. Okay, nothing heavy, nothing major, other than life's wear and tear. And I reacted badly recently this week, and I don't know if it's a DSM thing, and I haven't been officially diagnosed with explosive disorder syndrome, which means just like bugging out, going off. It's basically like I'd imagine, and I'd have to be fact checked on this. I don't have panic attacks that I've heard people have, where it's akin to a fucking heart attack. But I fucking bug out, and it's performatively loud, and it's unpleasant for people near me, and it's not okay. And I think they've been minimized, but they happen. And I guess where I have to go is to recognize the trigger, which is I don't like using these buzzy words out of a professional's office, because I think that's also part of the problem, right? Is we're auditing classes and not sitting in for the whole thing and submitting to the test and trying to get the maximum knowledge. We're just auditing, and you hear something and it latches on, and it's as much as you want to think that the internet has provided an alternative, it's still the fucking Today Show. And the Today Show, the host gets about as much information as you do about something you heard, and then they ask questions, and the expert rambles, and none of this can be done in a 3-minute segment to any degree, whether it's worth it, and none of it really on a scroll can be done, and so. And then, I use another word everybody uses, but like a deep dive is essentially what you would major in, or what really piques your interest. And so again, I don't want to talk about myself as if I'd have discussed this with a professional, and I don't like to talk about my triggers because that gets too personal. But let's just say, and because it wasn't personal about it, I had the good fortune of having a couple of auditions, and 2 auditions for the same show. So that's great. That's a big coup. It's a win. It's in the win column, and it's the agony of being an actor that, that's something you just have to celebrate, forsake not the days of small beginnings. And occasionally you will hear something overheard. And I guess essentially what the internet is you're eavesdropping on more people than you used to. I remember I wrote a blog post a long time ago about a time I was in a post office and there was a long ass line. And I love bookstore, the smell of bookstores, a post office, and sometimes a supermarket. That when I have these weird feelings of nationalistic pride or knowing we have it good is when I'm in these environments, which is another thing about eliminating all of that stuff. Yeah, it sucks to wait in line at the post office, but I don't know. There's just something about it. Maybe it was because there was a really nice one that they sold, and I don't know, it's going to be developed into something else, but there was a really nice post office in Santa Monica, and it was just, you just see the wood and the wrought iron and the marble floors and all that stuff. And bookstores just smell good, and they smell like people thinking and it's possibility and all that stuff. So I love bookstores. And but I was in the post office online, and you're a people watcher if you're an actor or an artist or just a curious person, and there's a lot of banged up people out there. And that's what scares me when I lose my shit. If I'm doing it in public, I'd look like one of those banged up people, when I'm having an explosion or whatever. A fit, basically, is what it is, right? When you become age regressed. But that's what happens, right? But you'll see this a lot, especially in major cities, right? You'll see a lot of banged up people. And this day, a woman kind of like bogarted the line, right? Older white woman bogarted the line, and like oblivious, and like doing that, like, I'm so, like, this is like it's our fucking problem. I have errands today, and she was just in that, and a black gentleman in his maybe 50s, he basically said, my lady, you're cutting the line. And it wasn't that he was being hostile. It was done very deftly. I remembered that it was like, he was the only one who said anything, but he wasn't going to let it go. And she was like, and she kind of, oh, okay. And she got behind him. And so now they're line mates, but they're further back than she was trying to be. And I'm way behind the whole fucking thing. There's like those big islands where you would fill out your paperwork. It was like, we were on the turn, and so they were kind of like across the desk. And somehow she and him got to talking, and it was kind of smoothed out, and they were engaging each other in a very interesting way. I couldn't make out necessarily everything, but I was kind of edging in, because I knew something interesting was happening. And she may be one of these people, but like she said, I got to go either put money in the meter, or I forgot one more package in the car. Is there any way you could watch my spot in line? Let me come back in. And she jetted and came back, and they got back online, and then they joked about how this shit wasn't moving anymore. And like, it didn't really matter if she went out to the car, as how slow this was going. And they were commiserating in that, where complaining is a fun thing, when it's just two people exhausting. And I hate when people have to go, but before that, I have to backtrack a tad. At some point, I think he told her this isn't that serious. He wasn't scolding. He was just trying to get her out of that fucking, that spaz energy that people get when they're banged up or out in public or whatever. And so they're talking, and the one phrase I heard the guy utter was that he said to her, anxiety robs you of your joy. And I heard that loud and clear. And I was like, that dude's a sage, or he's just quoted somebody really dope off the top of his head, and salute to that. And I got to hear it. And then I recounted the story to a friend, and a friend said, if you think that's that quote, and that you eavesdrop on that, and if you think that was not meant for you, that's one of the theories of sort of the universe or God's, somehow the vehicle of that conversation, that little thing that they sort of developed, and I called it in my blog, I called it a micro friendship, kind of blew up online. And that's all really small talk is. And that's all really like getting out there and chatting with people. And that's all what really sort of the town squares used to be. And, and it's why, like, if you have a cliche about Italy, not Italian Americans, but Italians being warm and friendly, is the way they build these circles and these campos, Campo Fiori is a place, like these squares where it's basically a public square. They haven't mowed them down to put strip malls. They've left them intact, and there's flea markets in there and stuff, but it's communal and it's out in public. And so they're better at communing together. And I bet you the cell phone is affecting them too. So I'm not trying to pedestalize people, but all I'm saying is, like, if you don't have the post office anymore, and if they're overworked, and you can't even manage to get a line, and then the line is in a crappier post office because it's not a nice one, and et cetera, you're not going to have these moments where, yeah, it sucks to wait in line, but wouldn't it be nice to make the most of it and have a micro friendship? And that's kind of what the gist of the post was. And I think I called it Stamps and Wisdom was the title. And I think I rounded the corner, and, anxiety robs you of joy. I was like, oh, ain't that the fucking truth? And I may be butchering the quote, but I may be remembering it, but it's the truth. It's almost the opposite, right? The opposite of joy is anxiety, right? Because anxiety, they say, and I think to get back to people misdiagnosing themselves, not dealing with the professional, only getting it from a book or something on the scroll. But anxiety is different than depression, right? Because anxiety is oftentimes worry of the future, right? She's bugging out, she's anxious, she's got things to do, and she sees this line and she snaps. This dude's just chilling. He's like, what are we going to do? And certainly you're not going to get in front of me just because you're afflicted with anxiety. And so he handled it, and he handled it really well. And talk about someone sort of hard to live by these maxims and these axioms, but they are there for a reason. They become powerful when repeated, right? Anxiety robs you of joy. To thine own self be true. Whatever your quotes are, a lot of them, neither a borrower nor a lender be. A lot of them are from Shakespeare. A lot of them are from the Bible. A lot of them are probably from Carl Jung and Freud. All that stuff. But anxiety robs you of joy, and so joy would be the opposite of depression and anxiety, and joy might actually be the moment, right? Because, this is what storytellers do, is that you put context on it. She could have left and said to her friends nothing about the event. She could have left the store, the post office, and been, that fucking guy, how dare he try to get philosophical with me? Or she could have had a better day because she kind of got snapped out of it and then had a bond. And I'd like to believe in my story, and that would be the way I would write the story. And maybe that's an example of an assignment you'd get in a good writing class. How would that, instead of just recounting it like I did in my blog, take the story to the next level? And that's what art does, is it puts the imagination on it. What if she walked out there and blah, blah, blah? And what if he, my thinking is she's probably the more interesting person in the story because she's the one who got changed, and he was living his truth and putting it into practice. Or you go the comedy route. He's all well adjusted, and then the minute in the next stop, he goes to the Coffee Bean or Starbucks, and he loses his shit online. I forgot every goddamn, that would be more of the comedy take. And I'm not supposed to. I'm not even in the frame of the picture. I'm just a bystander, and I caught a glimpse of this, and so, and again, we talk about it all the time, right? You can't live. Or can you? And I think it's just about how many more times. So if you have 24 hours, how many of those, and then you're awake for 12 of them, or you're awake, look at me, I sleep 12 hours. No, you're awake for, do the math. You got 8 hours of sleep. You got the rest of the day. How many of those hours are spent in tune or out of tune, right? And the very few of us are privileged enough to be able to figure that out, And many times you have to have, and the problem is, again, with comfort and convenience, is you may be slightly out of tune, but it still sounds good. And that's sort of that death knell they talk about to advancement or to accomplishment is comfort, right? But out of your comfort zone, too sharp, like a tuning, when you tune a guitar, like when you're way too sharp, you're fired up. And when you're flat, you're bleh, and then there's that you're looking for that, right? But some people, are in the key of G, and some people are in, blah, blah, blah. And And that's the problem, is we come into contact. And now we're not coming into contact except through these, these mediums. And just think about any of your friendships when you were more communal, like in high school and stuff, and you hung out with groups. There was always like a couple people you had a beef with in the group, and maybe that was part of your bonding, and you would talk shit about them, and hopefully not too much, or you would grow and you would learn. I was a group hopper. I hopped around from groups. I had different cliques that I leapfrogged from until I kind of learned. I learned the hard way and the best way that loyalty and people being forgiving and knowing you at your worst and still loving you, that's what a friendship is. And then I would add this to the next step and then it's incumbent on you to seldom be at your worst and to give the best you got to the people you care about. And that's why if I have these intermittent explosions and if I have reactions to things and I outburst, that's why I take them very badly, because I thought I was past this, and I don't want other people to be in earshot of it, and I don't want to be abusive to the people who care about me. And thankfully, in this instance, somebody pushed back, and that used to not be the case. And then what was said was very helpful. And so while I didn't get the parts, which there was a big snafu with submitting, and I was losing my shit, and thinking that any of these things I did and or were done to me were going to affect the outcome, and that's certainly not the case, and that's the immaturity speaking, and the wanting it too bad speaking for me. I don't know. It's just, it seems like I bounce back from that, and I feel better knowing that the pushback actually made me hear myself and to hear an unattractive part of myself. And I think that's when the growth can happen. There was a few teachers in school, and a good teacher will alert you to something that's not working rather than just sort of tell you you're great. And it's hard to hear, but that's where you either agree to fix it, disagree with some stones and some balls, or you block it completely and never investigate. And I probably have been guilty of all of those. But honestly, when you think about some of the feedback, if it's coming from a place of love and coming from a place of I'm here to teach you, that doesn't necessarily mean you're being unloved. That's the big issue, right? If a teacher gave you a criticism, and this is what makes it very hard for artists to take feedback, is there is a mix, there's a crosswire, to be honest with you. If feedback that is you're paying for feedback, you're paying to get better at a skill. If the feedback feels like hurts you, or it feels like betrayal, or how dare you, it's basically this feeling of unlove. And what the fuck are you there to get love for? And that's the problem with the arts. Blur these lines somewhat intentionally because of and that's why I honestly never recoil from the term storyteller, because if it's storytelling instead of an BFA in acting or a BFA in drama, if a BFA in drama is, because that's a big heading, I like that, but if storyteller doesn't bug me as much, because if the teacher, there's many ways to be a party to telling a story. I would even venture to say that in a painting class, if they talked a little bit about what's the story, that would be a way in. Do you know what I'm saying? Once you get your rudiments down, what's the story, right? Because the rudiments of a drummer are, flanges and rat-a-tats and shit like that, and drumming. What the storyteller is, okay, but sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's very hard, sometimes it's with brushes. That's the storytelling part. And so when I hear people call themselves storytellers, it never bugs me, because I think that's the lens I want to see everything through. And so an actor, unfortunately, is trained to show their emotions and their feelings, and then it gets very precious, and they never tell you. I mean, I guess they do. I'm wrong, because I'm sure they told us that you're in service of the play, and certainly when you're studying theater, you're more reverent to the text than you are in film, where you improvise, right? So it was told, but I was not really, unfortunately, my wires were crossed. And if I saw myself as a storyteller, then feedback would be the stories. I'm losing track of the story because of your performance. What you're doing now, I think, as the teacher and/or / director, what you're doing right now is sending the wrong story moment to me, and I'm either hired when it's professional, or I'm hired because you're in a class. That's all they're saying to you. And no trumpeter would take offense to the conductor or the musical director saying you hit the wrong note. They wouldn't say, "Don't tell me how to hit notes." That's what actors say all the time. "Don't tell me how to hit my notes." But a conductor would say, it's B flat, and it's the wrong note. Like, it's empirical. With acting, it's a little more nebulous, and there's that awful word interpretation, and that's all we're doing. But actors do tend to get defensive with feedback, and myself included. And it's a tough one to work on, and then if you're yelling at your partner, but you're not yelling, "I'm not yelling at you, I'm just yelling," but you're the only one here. So that's feedback that says, this is out of tune, and it doesn't mean she doesn't love me. And so all of that cross-wiring is what I guess I'm saying is part of the process I'm going through, and have been for many, many years, to sort of, undo, and to, you can't get a do-over, but you can start anew, right? You can change your attitude. You can make a friend online at the post office rather than start a fight, and get at the back of the line, huff and puff. Who knows? She may have blown off her chores, like, "I can't do anything today." And, all that spiral, because anxiety robs you of joy. And all I had to do was submit my auditions and feel good about it, and feel good that a casting director reached out, and that they thought of me for 2 different parts, upping my odds. And even though I didn't get it, that's still pretty cool. And then, getting good feedback from your agent. So, like, that was what more can I do that week except, pray that I get the gig someday. And I'll even quote the person that I saw, an old pal of mine. And this is name dropping, but an old pal of mine, Gabriel Macht, we know from Suits and from many other things. He's on one of these panels, and he's talking about how he would keep track of his auditions, and it was hundreds of auditions. And I've heard this a million times before. It's just that this week is what and one thing that's eerie about the algorithm, getting back to the technology, is like it's checking for what interests you. And so, there were a lot of people on that line, and I was listening in, and I only listened into the one conversation that really appealed to me. And so maybe that's sort of the algorithm doing its voodoo on me. But anyway, Gabriel was saying, I kept track of all my auditions, and it was hundreds. I went through hundreds, and it's a little, it's a little rich because he's done quite well. But what I've been saying to other people is, to be a working actor, first you have to be an auditioning actor. And so as these, and this is the hook of what he was saying, I think, and the gist was, each no is getting, quote unquote, closer to your yes. And so, boom, I had two for one project in 1 week, and it's only the beginning of March, and I've had I think over 10, so I'm getting my quote unquote numbers up, and it's, dare I say, only a matter of time. And that's all he was saying. It's just that part of him being successful is that those 100 auditions probably for him happened in 6 months. 100 auditions could take other actors years. So he was right. I mean, he was right. And nobody wants to hear it because they see the result and they think it was easy and it happened young. But he did go on those 100 auditions. They were coming in like floods. And, you know, I had 2 this week. And imagine that every week consistently, you know. And so he had the right attitude, because if he got to 100 before, I don't know when Suits came out, if he was saying hundreds, that means that he was getting as many no's as I'm getting percentage wise. He was just, and it's very hard to tell an actor that the win is the audition and the championship is the gig, you know. So I guess all of that was, you know, hopefully me hearing that gentleman online at the post office, taking it in, having a notion that anxiety is, you know, the absence of joy or the killer of joy. And, you know, to count my blessings and to only understand that, you know, knowing the difference between a typewriter and a BlackBerry is a luck out. Do you know what I mean? Because for many eras there were the printing press held on for a long ass time. You know what I'm saying? And that's I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the exponential nature of it. So the printing press technology did not evolve exponentially for a long time. It was like a flat line from the printing press to the typewriter. It took a long time, and it held supremacy for a long time. Now we're just freaked out because the supremacy of any particular technology is less than, you know, the shelf life is very small. But there will be another plateau, and that's the other thing people probably need to remember. And so it's an asset to be able to straddle eras. And I guess everybody does, but not everybody, really, right? If you didn't make it to your 50s or 60s or your 70s, how little did you see? My mom is in her 90s. I know I shouldn't tell her age, but just think of the beginning and end, like the beginning, the amount of change that she's lived through. And, you know, that is an amazing thing. If you're open to it, if you stay with the storytelling, and if you make yourself available to joy, to lessons, and if you try to minimize your outbursts or your triggers, or and I guess, you know, another overused stimulus or another used talking point is victim mentality. But, you know, how was I turning a good day into a bad day? What was the impulse to destroy a moment, you know? And that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I want to improve and try to make better. And, you know, think about that and know that I'm closing in on a yes. And you know, the more auditions, the merrier. And you know, it's just gonna happen when it's gonna happen. And you know, that's the lesson I'm gonna take. I gotta go back in. I gotta bust out these jokers, but I think we're getting to the point where I get into the song, so I'm gonna do it while we're here. I'm gonna look for the next song on the list. All right, let's go back to All Time. This is Dead Air. We are moving and grooving. We are, oh yeah, Oh, yeah. Okay. This one's a little embarrassing. But this goes back to my older theory of guilty pleasures, no such thing, and that you should vibe on music that if somebody busted in, you were grooving to it alone in your room, that it would be slightly embarrassing. That's how I know I like a song kind of in my bones. Because it will transcend my genre of choice. It'll just be an earworm. It'll be something that I don't care what anybody says. I like this song, and that's kind of what this list kind of is to me, because it's not the curated list. It's not, like a Rolling Stone and you make me feel like a natural. It's not the de rigueur important songs. It's literally these random songs that I bump for the randomness of the internet and these streaming services. And it's a song that I remember vaguely from the time it came out. And then when you do a little research, it goes down to the producers. And I have to say the name of the song now. It's Give It To You by Jordan McKnight. That's the embarrassing part. Not to disparage that artist. He's a good singer and dancer, and he's one of the new kids on the block. But he had a solo moment where he had a song called Give It To You, and the fucking beat is bonkers. And the reason I probably picked up on it is it's Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are the producers. And another compilation that you can find is you can go now and that's why we're at the point where we're at now in pop music, is that if everybody's saying it sounds the same, it's that there's a X amount of producers, and it's producer driven, not artist driven. Whereas in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s, it was more A&R would try to find these musicians, and they'd grind it out, and they'd try to be discovered, and they'd have a body of work, and they'd pair a producer with them to see if they could get that sound out of them, the live thing. But today it's more producer driven, and in the old model, New Kids on the Block weren't really originating material. Let's just be honest. They were a pop experiment boy band, and they blew up. So when Jordan McKnight matured into his 20s, mid-20s, he might have even been a little older, but I think this is a 90s track. The idea of going solo was, changing up the New Kids on the Block, trying to be a man, and he had a hit with this song called Give It To You, and it's just got this incredible beat and these tempo changes, and it's danceable as shit, and it's like a little sexy because it's about, I guess this is a toxic masculinity song, because it's all about how good he's gonna give it to you. So that's the 90s right there, and it was this white boy with a little flavor, and he had moves, and so that's the song next on my list, is Give It To You by Jordan McKnight. But Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, if you don't know, have what they coined as the Minneapolis sound. And they were in a band called The Time. That was Morris Day and The Time, but Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Prince, and they're all kind of contemporaries. And Prince put them on and wrote a couple of their tracks. I think he wrote the 775-311 or whatever that song is. I never get the number right. And Prince was they were like proteges of Prince, but Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the keyboard player and I think the bass player, they started producing hits for everybody, most notably Janet Jackson's entire coming out albums. And from the Control album on, I think they did at least 3 of her albums, Control and Rhythm Nation and all of that great stuff. And I've said controversially to many people that I vibe more on Janet Jackson music than Michael Jackson music. Maybe it's just the era. I just like the danceability. I think the hits were just kind of cleaner and more eclectic, and I just love the Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis sound. But they're so musical that they had a big hit with Human League. They will work. They can make everybody sound dope. And then I'm saying the economics and the positioning of Jordan McKnight at the time, they were trying probably very hard to break him as a solo star. So the idea that they sat him down with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis was to give him that credibility and see if the collabo could really produce something that would change his trajectory, you know. And it did for a minute, and you know, they're still on the road, so that's success. That group has stayed together and can sell out arenas moving forward. So, and I'm sure that they bust out that track in the middle of the set to extend it, just like how New Edition goes out and they do all the solo stuff also. And I don't know. I love Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis music. They're oft sampled. Some of their stuff is sample driven, but they're players too. And that Minneapolis sound. And it took me forever. Escapade. You know that song Escapade by Janet? When she goes she says Minneapolis. I didn't know what the fuck she was saying. I didn't until maybe 4 years ago. I didn't know that she's shouting out Minneapolis, because that's where Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Prince and the Replacements. Then that's a very fervent ground for music. It's kind of underrated, but that's what she's shouting out is Minneapolis. I was like, I don't know what the fuck she was saying. I mean, just something. Think of what a misinterpretation of Minneapolis. Even if it's just onomatopoeia, it's clear what she's saying. I just didn't put it together. So yeah, she goes Minneapolis and Escapade. So that was the song of the week, the song of the day. I spoke last week a little bit about, oddly enough, not that I'm channeling anything or any particular zeitgeist, but I did mention ballet and opera last week on the Death Session, and then our boy Chalamet is in all kinds of hot water for shitting on it. And I might have been saying the same thing, he just didn't say it very eloquently. I was saying that it's high art and that it's unattainable for the masses per se, but that it was, very much going to stay intact because of how high the bar for entry is. And the reason I don't know if I took it this far, to hear Chalamet shit on it when he's trying to be a very heavyweight actor is a bummer, because I know, and he knows, acting is not as high a barrier for just entry, as being a professional ballet dancer, professional opera singer. And I think he's leaving that part out. And so the market will be smaller, and not that it's dying, right? And it's part of the problem with why I resent the English and Australian invasion of all the acting roles, is because the barrier for entry to be considered a fine actor in England is a lot higher than it is in America. And there aren't as many Chalamets in England because they're too busy in Shakespeare repertory or in drama school. Not that drama school makes you a good actor, but it gives you a certain skill set, and it elevates your ability to interpret material because you're working on the classics. And I know Chalamet went to high school of performing arts, but he was working as a young person in film, and he's done theater, but he doesn't understand that he's actually denigrating acting if he can say that opera and ballet are dying. Because to be an actor in America, you just got to be pretty, and a Kardashian can do something on television just as well as Kate Winslet if it's just a boring little part. But Kate Winslet's going to separate from the mass amount of actors because of her high level of ability and training. And so you got to be very careful when you start making comparisons, and art is art, and storytelling is what really comes down to the through line. You tell stories in opera through another language and only through song and staging and histrionic acting, and you're filling up the arena. You got to like that kind of music. I'm not into it, but I would never disparage it. And I know what those opera students I knew at Carnegie Mellon and at Oberlin, they are practically polyglots. They learned Italian, they learned German, French, and there's not that many English operas, so that's why there's a barrier there. Ballet, I mean, the effort. I've taken a ballet class, which you might think is hard to imagine, and it's very difficult. There are football players that took it to elongate their muscles and elongate their career, and that is the combination of sports and art. And then they tell the story with dance anyway. He was just not really thinking. You shouldn't let hot mic takes like that go. I don't think there needed to be a backlash. I just think he's got to be very careful because what the barriers for entry just to be proficient are a lot different in different art forms. So I want to try to aspire to the high end, which is why it's hard to struggle in the arts and as an actor when you have had such a high exposure to the finer things. But I do want to put out there that I want to join the ranks of well-known actors, not for fame per se, but just because I think American actors are worth it just as much as the British actors. That's why I love a show like Artistry that has diversity, but it's baked in the cake. It's a diverse cast because it's Yanks and Brits working together, all that stuff, and then you have race and class and American and old money, new money. That's a very rich stew, and that's the kind of stuff I aspire to. So, all right, Timothy Chalamet, you're dope. Don't get me wrong. And I'm sure you'll figure it out moving forward. But man, that's fun, and that's been a digression after the song. Jordan McKnight's "Give It to You" mentioned in the same breath as Shakespeare and Puccini and Tchaikovsky and Alexander Goodenough and Mikhail Baryshnikov and anyway. That's about as far as I can go on any of those things. Watch The Turning Point. That would be a movie about ballet. And I guess there's Center Stage. And anyway, have a good week. And I will try to keep my explosions to a minimum. And I hope to see you next week. Peace. Session79.